Welcome to This Might Be Personal, Episode 6 Falling Out of the Sky. I did everything right. Every appointment, every blood test, every EKG, every medication change, every instruction, every sacrifice. I was ready. I lay on the operating table, thinking about everything it had taken to get there. Months of testing, months of waiting, months of wondering whether every dizzy spell, every headache, every stumble in my speech meant I was still recovering or whether it was happening again. But that morning, I thought the waiting was finally over. The hole would be closed, the risk would be reduced. I wouldn't have to live with the fear of another stroke hanging over me. The weight of worrying would finally be gone. The operating room was bright, white, almost impossibly clean, and it smelled like absolutely nothing. It was so clean that it didn't even have a smell. They transferred me from the stretcher onto the operating table. Bright lights hung above me, monitors hummed, metal trays reflected the light. People moved around the room with quiet confidence. Then I heard my surgeon, my doctor. He was talking with another doctor about how straightforward everything would be. His voice was calm, certain. Like this was the same kind of mundane task as setting an alarm clock. When he was talking to me before the procedure, he said it was basically fun for him now. And I remembered that, just how calm he was. Rock music played in the background, and I watched his team look at one another, their eyes making commentary before anyone said a word. A little smile, a little laugh. Then someone looked over at me. "We're sorry about the music." And somehow it helped because everyone around me acted like this was just another Monday, something they had done before, something they knew exactly how to do. They weren't afraid. And for a moment, that made it easier for me to not be afraid either. I lay there thinking, I did everything right. I followed every instruction. I showed up for every appointment. I completed every test. I stopped medications. I started medications. I gave up Mother's Day to prepare. I drank the liquids. I fasted. I'm ready. This moment is the moment I have been waiting for. The hole will be closed. The weight will finally come off my shoulders. I waited for someone to tell me they were putting me to sleep. Instead, someone leaned over. "We're going to give you some medicine to help you relax." I looked up. "Wait, I'm going to be awake?" "You'll be sleepy." Sleepy, not asleep. That wasn't what I expected. I had expected the medication to calm me, to blur the room, to knock me out enough that I wouldn't really know what was happening. Instead, I was still there, still listening, still aware of the room around me, and suddenly I had been there before. Another operating room, another table, another day when I had expected everything to go right. Years earlier, I had gone into labor expecting a normal birth. I hadn't expected an emergency C-section. I hadn't expected the panic. I hadn't expected to be awake on an operating table while everything changed around me. While laying on that table, an intern held something up. There was blood in it. He looked almost fascinated. "Cool," he said, and I realized it was the tube from my epidural. I've never actually seen this before. Then he said something about the blood meaning I might have a stroke. I was already scared, already vulnerable, already surrounded by people doing things to my body that I couldn't see or control. And suddenly, someone was casually telling me I might have a stroke. The intern was removed from the room. The head anesthesiologist stepped in. He looked at me. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm going to take care of you." Then he started injecting medication through the IV in my hand. I became loopy, drowsy, disconnected from the edges of the room, but I never actually fell asleep. I was still awake, still aware, still waiting. Then they delivered my baby. I waited to hear him cry. There wasn't a cry, just silence. They took him away. I didn't know then that he would need to be resuscitated. I only knew that my baby had been taken from the room, and I hadn't heard him cry. He's okay now. But in that moment, I didn't know that. In that moment, all I knew was the silence. I knew what it felt like to lie awake on an operating table while everyone around me had information I didn't have. I knew what it felt like to surrender control of my body, to wait for someone else to tell me whether everything was going to be okay. And now, years later, I was back under bright lights, on a narrow table, back listening to people speak around me, back waiting for medication to make me less aware than I actually was. The procedures weren't the same. The circumstances weren't the same. But my body remembered the feeling before my mind could explain it. That feeling of being awake, vulnerable, unable to leave, unable to see what was happening, trusting people I barely knew with the things I loved most. Back then, it had been my baby. Now, it was my heart. Someone touched my shoulder. "Amy." The operating room came back into focus. The white walls, the bright lights, the monitors, the rock music, my surgeon's calm voice. I reminded myself that this was different. This wasn't an emergency. This was planned. They knew what they were doing. My doctor had told me how straightforward it would be. This is practically fun now. I had done everything right. By the end of the day, the hole in my heart would be closed. The procedure began. I couldn't see what they were doing. I could only hear bits and pieces of conversation, movements around me, metal touching metal, short instructions, little tugs here and there, calm responses. At first, everything sounded exactly the way I expected: routine, controlled, confident. I tried to relax. I tried to let the medication pull me farther away, but I was still there, still awake, still listening, still anxious. And slowly, the room began to change. It wasn't dramatic. There weren't alarms, no one was panicked, no one started yelling. If you had walked into the room, you probably wouldn't have noticed anything had changed. But I noticed. The conversations became longer. The pauses became quieter. Questions started replacing statements. I couldn't see their faces, but I could hear the confidence changing. I remember thinking, something isn't right. I couldn't tell you how long it had been. Time works differently when you're lying on an operating table. Minutes feel like hours. And eventually, my surgeon spoke to me. "We're having a little trouble." A little trouble. I didn't know yet that those words were about to change everything. He explained that my PFO wasn't a simple opening. It wasn't a straight path. It was a tunnel, a long, winding tunnel. They were trying to guide the wire through it, but every time they reached the turn, it wouldn't go. They tried again. Nothing. They adjusted. They tried another angle. Nothing. Again, nothing. I couldn't see the guide wire, but in my mind, I could picture it. Searching, turning, stopping, searching again. I kept waiting for someone to say, "Okay, we got it." Instead, the pauses just kept getting longer. I remember hearing my doctor talking with another physician, thinking out loud, working the problem. Everyone stayed calm. No one gave up. No one rushed. They just kept trying because that's what you do until eventually you can't. Finally, my doctor leaned over. He looked at me with the same calm expression he'd had all morning. Only now, there was disappointment behind it. "We can't get through." I stared at him. I don't think I understood at first. He explained it again. The hole wasn't the problem, the tunnel was. Most people don't have a tunnel like mine. Mine, with the twisting and the curving, mine made turns that wires couldn't navigate. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You have an anatomy we see in less than 1% of patients." Less than 1%. After everything, after months of searching, after finally finding the hole, after believing today was the finish line, I had somehow landed in the less than 1%. I remember thinking, seriously, even this? He explained there was another option, a different procedure, a transeptal puncture. Instead of traveling through the tunnel, they would create a new path. But not today. Today, we were done. I wanted to bargain. Could you just keep going? Could you try one more time? Could the other doctor try again? Could you do the other procedure today? Tomorrow? Can we just please fix it? Instead, the procedure ended. Not because the hole had been closed, because the path we thought would get there didn't. As they began cleaning up around me, I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was grief. Not because I had failed, not because my doctors had failed, but because I had spent months believing this was the day everything changed. And now, everything was staying exactly the same. As they wheeled me back to recovery, I wanted to cry. Not because I was in pain, because I wasn't ready to leave. I kept thinking, why won't they just do it today? Why can't they keep me overnight and schedule it for tomorrow? Please, why won't they fix it? Can't we just get it done? I wasn't afraid of another surgery. I was afraid of walking back into the unknown. I had spent months living there, months wondering, months waiting, months carrying questions no one could answer. For a few brief hours that morning, I thought I had finally reached solid ground. And now it felt like someone had taken that guide wire and shredded my cape. Not because anyone had done anything wrong, not because anyone had failed, but because the very thing I thought was going to carry me back into the sky couldn't make it through. Just hours earlier, I had believed I was about to become weightless again. Instead, I was falling. Not because I had let go, but because the path I thought would carry me forward didn't exist. Back in recovery, people came and went. Blood pressure, heart rate, incision checking, breaking up hematomas, checking the incision again. How are you feeling? I answered the questions, but my mind wasn't in recovery. It was still in the operating room, still hearing the words, "We can't get through." Eventually, my doctor came to see me. He pulled up a chair. He wasn't rushed. He wanted to make sure I understood what had happened. "The hole isn't the problem," he said. "It's the tunnel." He explained it again. Most PFOs are fairly straightforward, but mine wasn't. The winding in that tunnel made it so that every time the guide wire tried to get through it, it just couldn't get the turn. The guide wires are straight. Then he told me again about the next option. He wanted to make sure I understood since I had been on some medication in the operating room. With that transeptal puncture, they would intentionally create a new path by burning a hole through that wall between the upper chambers of my heart. I remember thinking at first that it sounded terrifying, but then almost immediately, I realized it didn't matter what it sounded like, because if I wanted the hole closed, this was the path. I asked him, "So what happens now?" He smiled, the same calm smile he'd had before the procedure. "We'll get you scheduled." But it wasn't for today. I nodded, because what else do you do? You nod, you thank your doctor, you let them wheel you out, and then you quietly grieve the ending you thought you were about to have. Adam drove us home. I remember staring out the window, watching the world move. People walking, cars driving, life continuing. It felt strange that the world kept moving, because mine felt paused. Training was paused, recovery was paused, the future I thought I was stepping into paused. Not forever, just long enough to feel heavy. I remember thinking about Shannon, about kettlebells, about all the times she'd watch me miss a lift. She never rushed over and said, "You're done." She'd smile, "Recover it. Find the moment again. Reset. Use where you are to get where you're going." At the time, I didn't realize that's exactly what life was asking me to do. Recover it. I couldn't use the path I thought would work, so I had to find another one. I wish I could tell you I left that day feeling inspired. I didn't. I felt disappointed, frustrated, tired. I had done everything right, and somehow I still ended up back at the beginning. Or at least, that's what it felt like. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't back at the beginning. I was standing at the beginning of a different path, one no one expected, one I never would have chosen, but one that would eventually get me exactly where I needed to go. The first guide wire couldn't find its way through my heart, so they made a new path. I've thought about that ever since, because maybe that's what recovery has been all along, not forcing my way down a path that no longer exists, but having the courage to let a new one be created. I thought I was falling out of the sky. Maybe I was just learning another way to fly.